What's up, guys, and welcome to the very first episode of my podcast that has yet to be named. So, this is just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, really. I don't know really what I'm going to call this podcast yet, but I wanted to do something kind of movie and music related, and this is going to be the debut episode, and what better way to start a podcast than with a review of Black Sabbath. So, to start everything out, I'm going to be reviewing Black Sabbath's 1983 album, Born Again. So, this was produced by Black Sabbath and Robin Black. So, Robin Black was the engineer on Sabotage, and he comes back for this record as producer. And so, the history of this album dates back. So, after the release of Live Evil and the departure of Ronnie James Dio and Vinny Appice, basically Iommi and Geezer Butler were the two last men standing in the band. So the two people, according to Iommi in his book, that were called were Cozy Powell and David Coverdale. Now, at that time period, if that was the tail end of 82 or early 83, that was around the time of Saints and Sinners and the Slide It In record. So they were busy with a very, very huge record deal with Geffen, and that was the reason they didn't do this project. And so Geezer and Iommi started taking auditions, and one of the notable people that actually sent in an audition tape was Michael Bolton, and he was later passed up on because of basically Iommi and Geezer not really liking what he was bringing. They didn't like, I don't guess they liked the look or the sound. It wasn't really what they were looking for. And they passed on him, and it was Don Arden. So Don Arden, the father of one Sharon Osbourne, he comes back into the picture, and before this point, he was not interested in managing Black Sabbath without Ozzy Osbourne. But it was all of a sudden, because of Sharon joining forces with Ozzy and managing Ozzy, that Don Arden, I think, wanted to get back at his daughter for, I guess, betraying him and going and doing something on her own. And so he gets back in with the Sabbath guys to manage them, and it was his idea to bring in Ian Gillan. Now at this point, Ian Gillan was done with the Gillan band, but he basically put the band on hold because he needed to rest his voice. And so all of a sudden, after a night of heavy drinking, Ian Gillan's now in cahoots with Iommi, Geezer Butler, and now Bill Ward's back. And according to Iommi, the band wasn't supposed to be Black Sabbath, but it was because of Don Arden, who said, hey, just let's call it Black Sabbath. So they basically said, okay, whatever, let's do it as a Black Sabbath record. They retreat to the Manor Studio in England, and they record this record. It comes out in 83, I believe August of that year, and it's went down in metal history as one of the most loved and hated records ever released. And I, for one, I love this record from start to finish. I think this is quite it's a really good record, but it's very unique. It's probably the most unique album ever released because it has a sound. I can see in some ways where it was going back to the old school Sabbath sound, and I definitely get that, but it ages much better than I think some of the later Sabbath albums do, and even some of the later Deep Purple albums. And there's a few songs on here. I mean, one song in particular is a direct rip-off of Highway Star, and I'll get to that track here in a few minutes. But The mix of the record is very infamous because it's very muddy and it's basically as raw and bare bones as you can get. So I mean, also going back to that older Sabbath sound, it's more in line to me to like maybe Technical Ecstasy in terms of the production style, because that album has a very muddy sound as well. But this production style is basically, it's only for this record. I've never heard another record. The closest I can come to hearing a record that sounds like this is maybe Hotter Than Hell by Kiss, which also has a very raw and bare bones, very muddy sound to it. And according to Iommi in his book, and that's where I got a lot of my information for this episode from, but he says in his book that it happened somewhere between the mixing and the mastering of the record. And basically in the studio, Gillan was playing the album really loud and it messed up one of the speakers, and that caused this real funny sound, but they didn't think anything about it. And by the time that they found out the mix was so horrible was when it was out and on the charts and they were out on tour. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a lose-win situation there, but I think the production really suits this album. And let's go ahead and just dive on into the tracks. So the first track on this record is Trashed, and I've always loved Trashed. It continues the pattern of very fast and furious openers for Sabbath, which they've always had very more fast openers, I guess within the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, you have Backstreet Kids, Never Say Die, Neon Nights, and Turn Up the Night, and this. And a video was made for this song, and it also was the main single off the record. And actually never was played live, oddly enough, which I'll get to the tour a little bit later. But yeah, this is a song, I really love it. It was written about a lot of the chaos that was going on during the recording of this record, because there's the stories out there about one day Gillan takes, I believe it was Bill Ward's car, and drives it into a lake or runs it into a wall. He destroys the car either way. And then as a act of revenge, Bill Ward goes out in front of the studio where Ian Gillan has a tent set up and destroys his tent. And it's just written about a lot of that chaos that was happening around the time. And I quite love the song. I think it's a great opener. I think maybe another song on here could have fit just as well as an opener. I mean, either way you look at it, I think it fits just as well. And then you have Stonehenge, which is an instrumental. Now, on the deluxe version of this album, there is an extended version, and I don't recall too much about it. I do remember it being much more of like a score type song, but I think it's fine. I mean, to me, it kind of takes away from the flow of the album, to be perfectly honest, but I get it. It's kind of like this mood setter, and it's not too far away from like E5 150 from the previous record, or, I mean, Breakout, stuff like that. It's just kind of there, and they would continue to do this with Jeff Nichols instrumentals later on. But yeah, it's fine for what it is. It's okay. So then we move to the next track, Disturbing the Priest. So this was written about a run-in with a priest they were rehearsing and practicing and stuff like that beside a church, and they got complaints for playing so loud, and that's what this song is really about. And this is probably the darkest, most just it's dark and evil sounding, and it's a really interesting song. It has that old kind of Sabbath groove to it from the 70s. I like it quite a bit. Some great screams from Ian Gillan, and probably the most well-known song off the record. Well, maybe the second most well-known song on the record. So then we move to The Dark, which is another instrumental. Once again, to me, kind of takes away from the mood of the record and the flow. but it's fine. I don't love it, and I really don't hate it. And that bleeds right into Zero the Hero. So at least Disturbing the Priest didn't have to have Stonehenge connected. This kind of does. Zero the Hero is probably the most well-known song off the record. The only song that made it after the tour for this album, and only in an instrumental form though. But it was basically ripped off by Guns N' Roses for Paradise City from Appetite for Destruction. And I like the song. I've always dug this track. I think it's a very dark and brooding song, much like Disturbing the Priest. And I really enjoy this track. I think it's great. It's got a great groove to it, almost borderline like rap rock in a way, because the way Ian Gillan's belting out the lyrics, it's very kind of almost like rap, hip-hop kind of stuff. And then track 6, this was written about Sharon Osbourne, and this is the track on the record that reminds me a lot of Highway Star, and the way the melody during the chorus, well, the verse into the chorus is. And I like the song. It's very fast and furious heavy metal Sabbath, and I like it. This could have opened the record as well. And then the next track, Born Again, the title cut, kind of an epic song, kind of like Children of the Sea mixed with Child in Time, which is very interesting. I like the song quite a bit. It's got some great vocals from Ian Gillan. Then Hotline, which is another song that kind of sounds like Highway Star in a roundabout way. I like the song quite a bit. It's one of my favorites on the record. And I like the riff a lot. It's just a really, really cool song. Some great screams once again by Ian Gillan. But I really like this song once again. I think it's just a really cool song. And then we move to Keep It Warm. So the final track on the record. This one, the riff dates back to, I believe, the Dio era. And I could picture Dio singing this song. I think that this could have fit right at home on Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. It's very bluesy, much like Over and Over and Lonely Is the Word. And I love this song. I think it's a great way to close the album. Then you have the bonus track, The Fall. It didn't make the record because it was a ripoff of the Wanton song by Led Zeppelin. And just listen to that song and then listen to this song. It's very similar. And yeah, that's the end of the record. I mean, a solid album. I guess it's like a 9 out of 10. It's a great album from start to finish, and just such a unique record. And the deluxe version has a concert from the Reading Festival in August of 1983, very early in the tour. So I'll get into the tour real quick before I wrap things up. So during this tour, Bev Bevan or Bev Bevan or Bev Bevan, however you pronounce his last name, from ELO, he joins the group as drummer. So instead of auditioning drummers, Sabbath basically calls a friend of the band. And Bev Bevan, which, like I said, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm just going to call him by Bev Bevan for this. But he joins the group. Basically, he had kind of a reluctance about playing some of the material because he really didn't think he could. So Tony Iommi talked him into doing the gig, and according to Iommi, he said he didn't think it would last very long. He hoped Bill would come back, which Bill Ward had left prior to the tour, but Bill Ward never came back. Bev Bevan did the entire tour, and after the tour, both Bev Bevan and Ian Gillan left. Ian Gillan left to do the Deep Purple Perfect Strangers reunion, and Bev Bevan, he ended up coming back to Black Sabbath very briefly in the late 80s for the Eternal Idol. But other than that, I mean, of course, he and Iommi have remained friends since. But yeah, the tour was quite interesting. I mean, hearing Gillan do stuff like Neon Nights and Heaven and Hell and War Pigs. I liked the way he did Black Sabbath. It was very, very, like, kind of evil sounding in a way. It was very interesting. You can hear it on that Reading Festival bootleg, or Reading Festival show that was released on the deluxe edition. And some people say it was kind of a train wreck at times, and then other people say it was awesome. And you had Gillan up there playing the bongos like he did back in the Deep Purple days, which, I mean, that's classic Gillan. And it was quite interesting. I mean, there's the stories of Gillan on stage taping lyrics to the monitors and falling over the pedal boards of Iommi and stuff like that. It was quite an interesting tour for sure, from the stories I've read and heard. And this was a band, I mean, I wish they would have done another record. I'm very surprised Ian Gillan and Tony Iommi never did another record after this. Maybe, which Iommi has talked about remixing this record for years since, and he wanted to do it when they last reissued the album, but they couldn't find the original masters. But now those have been found, and he wants to remix it. So maybe those two could come together and do something now. Because, I mean, Ian Gillan, he isn't the singer he used to be, but he can still sing pretty fairly. So I would love to hear something now with those two, which I know they did that Who Cares thing, which they re-recorded Trashed for. And that version of Trashed wasn't bad. But yeah, I mean, this was an interesting era in Sabbath history. And this was supposed to be kind of the final Sabbath record for a long time, because after this, everything fell apart and Iommi was going to go solo, but that didn't happen. That's another episode for another day. But this was almost going to be like kind of the final farewell for Sabbath, but it didn't end up being that way. And I'll talk about all that whenever I do Seventh Star in the future. So yeah, I'm going to leave you with some live tracks from the tour from this album. And I hope you all enjoyed this brand new episode. Like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube channel, or just give me some feedback on the podcast platform, whichever one I upload this to. So I hope you all enjoy. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and I will see you on the next episode. Here's some Sabbath stuff from 83 and 84. Thank you so much.
Yay! 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 Take my wine, and I'm going down. Won't you throw me a line? It's true religion, take me up them stars. I'll take your trouble, will you say me some prayers? Will you show me a sign? Will you throw me a line? Oh. So baby, set my mind. Talk between the devil and the deep sea. If you wanted, you could save my face. We got a trouble and a living disgrace. Will you show me a sign? Will you throw me a line? as a pain. Makes you relent, makes sense. Makes the trouble when you sing me some praise. Will you show me a sign? Will you throw me a line? make it anytime at all. Gotta see a rock and roll doctor. Gotta see a rock and roll doctor. Gotta see a rock and roll doctor. Gotta see him today. He's gonna blow me away. Blow me away. Blow me away. He's gonna blow me away. Gonna blow me away. Blow me away. Gonna blow me away. Blow me away. I gotta see my rock and roll doctor. Finish with my woman, 'cause she couldn't help me with my mind. People think I'm insane because I am frowning all the time. All day long I think of things, but nothing seems to satisfy. Think I'll lose my mind if I don't find something to satisfy. Can you help me occupy my brain? Oh, yeah. Someone to show me the things in life that I can't find. I can't see the things that make true happiness. I must be blind. You will laugh and I will cry. Happiness I cannot feel, and love to me is so unreal. And so as you hear these words, tell me now how I stay. I tell you to enjoy life. I wish I could, but it's too late. Thank you, you've been great. God bless you. Good night. Yeah! Yeah! Yeah!